They've brought us the works of Jean Vanier, Reginald Bibby, and Henry Nouwen. They've made Mass accessible to millions, and for 75 years, they've been trailblazers in Canadian Catholic publishing. And of course, I'm speaking of none other than Novalis. This year, Novalis celebrates 75 years, and here to tell us about the remarkable story behind Novalis is Suzanne Spino, the president of Bayard Canada, and Joseph Sinasac, the publishing director of Novalis. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Happy to be here.
To begin, it's my understanding that the name Novalis was only adopted in 1969. Can you tell us what inspired this name change, and what were you called before?
It's a very good question. In 1969, there were Catholic Information Centers across North America, and that is what we were called, the Catholic Information Center at the University of Ottawa. Mm-hmm. It was decided that we needed something to set us apart. This term Novalis was a Latin term, meaning a freshly plowed field ready for planting. And it was a fabulous metaphor following the Second Vatican Council. The notion of the parable of the sower and the seeds, and looking at the fields before us of people who were hungry for the kind of information about their faith that we were publishing. So that term was chosen to represent who we are as a publisher.
What inspired, what was the political climate that led to the founding of the Catholic Center? What were the events that led up to the founding?
You have to go back to 1935, in the mid-30s, the Catholic Action Movement, not just in Canada, but around the world, where you had laity and religious working together to bring the social teachings of the Church into their lives and into society. And they were very active in Canada, particularly in Quebec. And there was the Young Workers Movement, which was the youth wing of the Catholic Action. The University of Ottawa, they're very active. There was a priest named Father André Gay, who was the founder of the Canadian wing of the Young Catholic Workers. And there was on the Feast of the Immaculate Conception in 1935, there was a great rally at the University of Ottawa for this movement. And it was at that rally that he proposed the creation of the Catholic Information Center.
Wow. So tell us about Father André. He's the founder. What was his vision? What was the need that he sought to address?
Okay, Father André was an oblate missionary priest, one among many who founded, of course, St. Paul, then University of Ottawa. And what he was trying to address was the need for many, many Catholics to understand their own faith better. For in many ways, Catholics of that generation simply went to church on Sundays, and their faith revolved simply around Sunday Mass. Mm. It wasn't greatly integrated into their daily lives. So he tried to make the Mass a more accessible, first of all, more accessible for them, and secondly, as a way of deepening their own faith life and allowing them to have that faith life penetrate who they were as human beings and living out their lives. So he wanted to come up with a vehicle to give access to a wide mass of Catholics in a very affordable way, access to their Sunday worship and to more information about their faith.
So this is where the missalette comes from, Living with Christ?
That's exactly it. 6 months after that fateful rally and on the Feast of the Immaculate Conception in June of 1936, the first publication of Prix avec l'Église came out, and followed some 5-6 months later by the English version of that, which became Living with Christ.
Mm-hmm. Tell us more about the other projects that Father Gay initiated.
There were several. Some of them became quite well known around the world. The marriage preparation program that was started by Father Gay became adopted by other Christian denominations.
Am I right to assume that this was the first one of its kind?
This is the first one of its kind.
Wow.
So that began right here in Canada and was adopted in many countries around the world. It was adopted by the Anglican Communion and by the United Church of Canada, and is still in use, or its sort of ancestors are still in use today in the Francophone Church in Canada, and even in English Canada, we still have a marriage preparation program.
Wow. The Second Vatican Council and its air of aggiornamento brought, massive changes in the Church. How did you respond to those changes?
That's really interesting, because I think in some ways the Catholic Information Center anticipated what was going to happen at the Second Vatican Council. The movements in the Church that we were serving led to their fruition, if I could say that, at the Second Vatican Council, this opening to the world. And also even handing the Church to the people. No longer was it seen that the Church was something owned by the hierarchy and the religious, but it was actually the entire people of God. And really, right from the beginning, the Catholic Information Center was trying to serve that notion of church. So we were there with Living with Christ and Prion. We were there with the marriage preparation program. We were there with, for instance, a homiletic service that was helping people delve deeper into scriptures.
And those were some images from the 75th anniversary Mass that Novalis recently celebrated. So tell us, what are some of the festivities that you've had throughout this anniversary year?
The festivities first started in January of 2011, and we've had a number of things going on. And in June 4th, which was very close to the actual launching of the first Cheridan Eygelaar, which was June 1936, we had a commemorative Mass, and this Mass was celebrated by Monseigneur Paul-André du Rocher, and we were very proud to have him aboard because he's been a contributor to Living and to Prion for many, many years. And there's a beautiful choir led by Robert Miron, who's also a very able musician. And it was done at the chapel of the University of St. Paul University. And it was very, very, very nice Mass, a very touching, moving Mass.
Building strong relationships are integral to any successful enterprise. Tell us about the relationship between Bayard Canada and Novalis. How did that come about?
Well, first of all, you have to know that Bayard is owned by another religious community, just as Father Gay was part of the Oblates, and they were the owners of Novalis. Bayard is owned by the Assumptionists, or the Augustinians of the Assumption, called the Assumptionists. And Bayard Canada was created in 1991 by the Canadian Assumptionists, but it's a sister company to Bayard France, who was created in 1873, and they were created by the French Assumptionists. So what happened was, in the year 2000, the Oblates had already sort of split the activities of Novalis into two. They had contracted all the production and the marketing of the editorial products. So already they were not doing the ones, they were just doing the editorial and the pastoral contents of the products. And Le Droit, which had originally been owned by the Oblates, it's a rather complicated history, were the ones who had the contract for producing and marketing the books. And Unimedia bought those from Le Droit, and then Bayard bought this subcontract from Unimedia, and that was in 2000. So we were very close. We were still dealing with St. Paul. We were still dealing with the Oblates. So they were doing the editorial, and we were marketing the products. And then in 2008, unfortunately, they they had to choose between the research and the teaching at St. Paul, which they did, and so they sold us the trademarks, and we are continuing in the same footsteps. And actually, the mission of the Assumptionists is very, very close to the mission that the Oblates had given themselves, and Father Gay had given themselves when they started Novalis. The Assumptionists are a community who does a lot of education. They started out as, they were doing a lot of pilgrimages in France, especially Lourdes. I'm sure you know what Lourdes is all about. And they had started a magazine called Le Pèlerin, which is the pilgrim, to accompany these people who would go to pilgrimages. And that's how they started this educational objective. And we've kept this mission of accompanying people into their spiritual lives that Father Gay had already started with the Catholic Center.
Okay, so tell us about some of your more recent initiatives in Catholic education.
In Canada, Canada's unique in a way in that it has this very large publicly funded Catholic education system. And the Church develops the religious education program for them. In 2008, the Ontario bishops asked us to develop a special textbook for grade 11 world religions class. And we worked with an educational publisher called Nelson Education to develop that textbook. That textbook has been a fabulous success and is now being used certainly across Ontario and will be soon used in other parts of Canada. But what it also showed us is there's a great need in the Catholic education sector for really solid, dependable resources from the Catholic perspective. So we have now started to develop a number of things in that area. I can mention just a couple, a series of books we call 25 Questions. 25 questions about the Mass, about prayer, about the Pope. And those are for middle school grades. They are going very well because we are faced with a Catholic population that really knows very little about their own faith and their own traditions. In some ways, the definition of the new evangelization that Pope Benedict talks about is really re-evangelization. And so we see ourselves as trying to serve that cause by providing access to the really rich, beautiful traditions that the Church has, but in a way that people can understand today. Mm-hmm. So the school is obviously a number one starting point for that kind of thing, and we're trying to work with educational experts and teachers to really come up with the kinds of resources they need.
And as you know, in Quebec, there are no longer any confessional schools. So our attention has really shifted to the parishes themselves, who have now entered into catechetical programs. And because it's rather new to the parish priest to be taking this on, we're helping. And we are very much into resources, and they're in English as well as they're in French for sacramental preparations. The Bérubé books, which we call it, Françoise Darcy de Bérubé and Jean-Paul Bérubé, have developed preparation program for sacraments that are widely used both in Canada and in the US, and these are now being used by the parishes.
This idea, when you said it, the new evangelization, Pope Benedict has declared next year, 2012-2013, the year of faith. What do you see your role being in the new evangelization?
I think almost everything we do strikes a chord somewhere inside the new evangelization. Certainly it is, as I mentioned, helping today's Catholics and people who are spiritually hungry to find ways of tapping into the really rich, beautiful traditions that we have had, that have existed for centuries and millennia even. And helping them to do that in any number of different platforms, media platforms, because we now live in a multimedia world. So we have to find ways to speak to them where they are, whether that means in the print book, and by all means we are going to continue with books, in the traditional notion, web, e-books, apps, all these different kinds of media that are being used by audiences around the world. We will find ways to reach those audiences using the kinds of digital resources that they're using.
You don't foresee a change in your content, though?
Well, the message is always the same. the story, the great Christian story that we have is unchanging. But how you tell that story has to change, because people have to understand it if they're going to be able to embrace it. And we're starting with a generation that knows very little about the story. So you really have to start almost at square one, at a very basic catechetical level, and helping people learn that story all over again and understand it in the categories that they know.
In a different way. I think we have to take what Father Gay was trying to do in 1935 and just put it into another, or use other platforms to reach the people, but still try and reach the people, because as Joe says, a lot of our children today and our young people don't know what their faith is all about. And so we will try to reach these people and tell them how wonderful it is, and how rich it can be, and how it can enrich their lives as well.
You've worked with amazing Catholic thinkers, Henry Nouwen, Jean Vanier, Reginald Bibby. Tell us, what is the most inspiring aspect of working with these people?
I could talk about Jean Vanier a little bit, just because I have worked with him personally. And first of all, it's his very presence. It reminds me in some ways of John Paul II in that regard, is that just when they are present with you, for them it's almost as if you're the most important person in the room. It's not about them, it's about you, and their full attention is focused on you. And I felt that way in talking to Jean Vanier and interviewing him at one point. And we've got him recently to revise a couple of books that he had done in the 90s, and we're updating them for the next generation. And his attention to detail is really quite amazing, considering he's now in his 80s. But he's very, very focused on you as a person, and not as just something to be used, but a real human being, somebody to care about, somebody to respect.
What really striking, I find, with these people too, is their humility. I mean, they've done wonderful things, and it's awe-inspiring, but they still stay so very humble. They're so very approachable. And they're also very passionate people, so you can't help but enter into their passion.
You've been there, Novalis has been there for these pivotal Canadian moments in Canadian church history. World Youth Day 2002 comes to mind. You've contributed so much, and even the recent canonization of Brother Andre. Can you tell us the highlights for you and what you did there?
Well, you speak about World Youth Day. I can speak about the canonization of Brother Andre, because I was at the Olympic Stadium, and we had actually done the booklet, the Prions en Église, for the Mass, and it was just so moving. The whole Mass, the whole ceremony. I mean, there must have been between 30 and 50,000 people in that stadium, and everybody was so, I don't know, so calm, and yet so I'm looking for a word, so awe-struck, actually. And we were all brothers. We were all friends in Brother Andre. We were all finding each other, and it was really awe-inspiring. And we had done the booklet, and that was, I think we did 50,000 booklets, so there must have been quite a few people over there. But it was something very important for Quebec, I think, for the Quebec Catholicism and the clergy. And you were at World Youth Day, Joe.
Yeah, what I could say about World Youth Day is it really brought together a lot of Catholic, not just individuals, but Catholic organizations to pull that off, because it was such a huge, huge undertaking. And I was involved on the communications side. At that time, I was publisher and editor of the Catholic Register newspaper. However, we were working with Novalis on a couple different products and projects, because we had a team of young writers who were on the spot all over the city during that week. We worked together on a souvenir photo album, and just the sense of having a great sense of mission that week, that we really had something that was vital and important, not just to the church, but to the whole world, because the whole world was focused on Toronto that week, and focused on Catholics praying, Catholics in worship together, Catholics just simply enjoying being alive. And it was a very exciting week. It still gives me chills to think about that week.
It does.
So what's in store for Novalis moving forward?
A couple things I can say. Number one, I think the new evangelization will continue to grow and shape what we are doing over the next few years. And part of that means growing and providing our service in a multicultural and multi-faith world, and working in a country that really epitomizes those things, Canada. So I would say that's one big challenge, and it's one big opportunity. The second one is the digital revolution. And that's not just a unique challenge to us, it's a unique challenge to all publishers. But certainly we are embracing it and finding ways to help evangelize through all the new media.
I would say that after 75 years of listening to the needs and doing things for people, that, well, first of all, Novalis is now very well known, a brand name in religion in both French and English in Canada. And I think it'll be easy for us to continue what has already been started. So to keep on listening to people, to keep on meeting their religious and spiritual needs, and hopefully in both languages still. And whether it's done through a digital platform or through an app or through whatever other technology, whatever other means technology can bring us, we'll be there.
Thank you so much, Joseph and Suzanne, for being with us today. Joseph Sinasac is the publishing director for Novalis, and Suzanne Spino is the president of Bayard Canada. And that's all for tonight. Thank you for watching Catholic Focus.